risk. Risk is our business. That's what the Starship is all about. That's why we're aboard her.
Engage.
There are 3 things to remember about being a starship captain. Keep your shirt tucked in, go down with the ship, and never abandon a member of your crew.
I don't care if the odds are against us. If we're going to lose, then we're going to go down fighting.
But we're going to learn from those mistakes. That's what being human is all about.
What a piece of work is man.
It is a tale told by an idiot.
Make it so.
Hello, Internet, and welcome back to the Boldly Going Podcast, a podcast where 3 guys talk about every episode of Star Trek ever made. I'm your host, Alec.
I'm Ethan.
Sadly, Bailey will not be joining us this week. He's got the flu or the sickness or something. He will be back with us next week for the next episode, and we will give him a couple minutes uninterrupted in that episode to give his thoughts on Mudd's Women, which is the episode we watched this week. So if you want to really hear what Bailey has to say about Mudd's Women, I'm afraid you are going to have to wait a week. But this week you got me, you got Ethan, and you've got Mudd's Women. Now, Ethan, if you think in your mind about a great Star Trek villain from the original series, one of the only villains to ever go toe-to-toe with Kirk more than once in a live-action picture, there are only 2 choices: Khan and Harry Mudd. That's right, folks. Harry Mudd holds the distinction of being the only character, other than Khan, to face Kirk more than once in a live-action Star Trek production. And, if we want to be technical, he's the only reoccurring character on the original series who is not a member of the Enterprise crew. I like Harry Mudd. I like him a lot. Ethan's not been sold.
Alec was very generous in his first description and more accurate in his second, where he called Mudd a recurring character as opposed to a returning antagonist. Calling Mudd an antagonist is very generous to his level of complexity and value within the story. So I do not think that Mudd deserves much of my time or consideration.
Well, we're going to have an interesting conversation about Mudd's Women, because I remember this episode more fondly than it is. This is probably my 3rd time. Yes, this is my 3rd time going through the entire series that I can recall from end to end. And I watched a bunch of these as a kid, so I've seen the first 30 episodes more times than I've seen the other ones. So I've seen this episode a bunch of times. I remember it as being better than it is. For me, as a little teaser before we get into it, Mudd is the saving grace of the episode. I think Mudd, the episode that comes up in Season 2 in which Mudd returns, is a much, much, much better episode and a much better use of the Mudd character. And that, to me, is probably maybe even a top 10 episode. I don't know, I say that a lot. I like a lot of the episodes. This one, to me, is not nearly as good. And Ethan, before we get deep into it...
I just don't know. I haven't seen the future episodes, so I can't make any rash comparisons. I can't start slinging Mudd until we actually get to that point. But, oh, that was bad. I feel terrible for that.
Now, Ethan, this is the only question I will ask Bailey when he's on next week, because I really want to hear his take on this as well. But this was one of the 3 episodes that was considered for the pilot of Star Trek. They went on with No Man Has Gone Before, an episode we all liked. We all liked a decent amount. What do you think of this episode as a pilot?
I think the best part about this episode is that they decided not to make it the pilot. It is a poor display of what science fiction can be. It doesn't make it a bad story by itself, but it isn't a very great example of the genre of science fiction, and it certainly portrays a bit of an odd premise for what the show, at least people are judging the show to be based on. So you look at it and you say, like, is this the vision that we want to be casting with our very first episode? And I would agree with them that the answer is probably not.
The executives didn't like the idea of a pimp story being the story to bring people into their family-friendly wagon train through the stars franchise. Now, I think to call Mudd a pimp is a little unfair, but not that far off. So, as I always do, I watched the preview for this episode before I watched the episode to see how closely it lines up. And the preview is not that close. They put a lot of emphasis on Eve running off into the wilderness to try and die. And that is not a huge part of the episode. So they presented a lot more danger. There's a lot of emphasis on the dilithium crystals being cracked. But it's okay. So this episode begins pretty well. There's a chase sequence that's going on. The Enterprise is pursuing a smaller vessel that is not responding to any of their hails.
Yeah, before we get too into that, I want to bring up something that's somewhat been disturbing me over the last couple episodes and really stood out in this one at the beginning. Maybe because I was looking for it, I don't know. But the graphics of the front screen, whenever it's put up in front of the crew, are always vastly inferior to the quality of the graphics of anything that's from an outside perspective looking on the ship. The practical effects for the Enterprise itself flying through space and a few other things are relatively well done, especially for the era. But what they put up on the front screen, it's special.
I keep forgetting that because I'm going to plug them yet again, I'm enjoying the remastered DVDs, and to me it looks pretty good. But yeah, the visual effects from the front screen are never as strong. I mean, this is no GameCube logo. It's just a little ship flying around in an asteroid belt. And the Enterprise is giving chase. We have a new helmsman. Again, they've been going through different helmsmen pretty regularly. First it was dear departed Gary Mitchell, R.I.P., and then it was Mr. Bailey, who stayed behind with Baylock, and who knows what's happening to him right now.
He's with an international space hobo child, so R.I.P. for him.
And now we have our brand new helmsman, Mr. Farrow, my apologies. And Mr. Farrow will be with us for actually a couple of episodes.
Hey, good news is he obeys orders.
Hey, the best thing about Farrow is he's not a nut. He's just a capable character. And considering how much screen time he gets in this episode, if you watched this episode cold and didn't know that he wasn't one of the cast member characters, you could have been fooled into thinking he was a regular guy on the show, and this was much like Sulu or one of the other characters, just not an episode focused on him, but he still has a decent amount of effort. So I think Mr. Farrow does a fine job being the helmsman here, the assistant navigator. He's no Gary, but that's also probably a good thing. This is, one other thing to point out is Uhura is still in gold. They haven't quite determined yet that communications is going to be a service rather than a command position. But next episode, Uhura will be in red. But before we get too far into this, I need to mention the people who made this episode work, as I like to do at the beginning. Mud's Women aired October 13th, 1966. It was directed by Harvey Hart, another director who did a pretty good job from a visual directorial standpoint, but who was not asked to come back, sadly, because his shots were too artsy and they took too long. And that made the editors mad, because this episode went a day overshooting because Hart actually wanted to craft and compose some nice shots. And regardless of what you think about the story content, there are some nice cinematic shots in this episode. So Harvey did a good job with directing. It's too bad he didn't come back. This was the 4th episode produced. This was the 6th episode aired. The teleplay was by Stephen Candle, but the story was by Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry has this story in his early 1964 outline, Star Trek Is, which was the document that they used to pitch the idea in the early stages to the executives. There's a bunch of one-off blurbs about different episodes, and the episode that this one would eventually become based on was called The Women, and the original synopsis reads in its entirety, quote, duplicating a page from the Old West, hanky-panky on board with a cargo of women destined for a far-off colony, end quote. Candle took this concept, ran with it. He said that, quote, Gene had the idea of using a personal enhancer allure drug, and I provided the character of Harry Mudd. So all the good stuff comes from Candle. We spent an afternoon talking about it, and out of the conversation evolved the story idea, and then, of course, I wrote the story. Gene went over it in great, meticulous, and obsessive detail, and then I wrote the script. It's, according to Shatner, kind of a miracle that this episode was made at all, because it's probably the most overtly sexual of the original series. Gene's script was, of course, far more overtly sexual than what they made, because Gene Roddenberry, while he had very many good qualities, also was a huge pervert, and that was not a good quality that he had. But they trimmed a lot of it down and made it into a passable episode. See, when Ethan and I will get into this, because we've talked a little bit beforehand, but in my opinion, a lot of the reason why this episode fails is not the concept. I think the concept is good. I think the execution is the problem. But we will get to that later. So we're back to the chase.
We're back to the chase, and one of my favorite lines from this chase is, "He knows we're after him." No, duh! This isn't Main Street. Maybe when you're walking home from, like, the pharmacy and someone's, like, behind you and you're like, I wonder if this guy's following
when
me.
you take the 4 rights.
Yeah, and then you realize that there's, like, 5 million people on the sidewalk, and of course that guy's not following you. But in space, where there is literally only you and another person, and they start even remotely going in the same direction, of course he knows that you're following him.
Now, there is an important thing for Star Trek that happens in this episode. They call them deflector screens rather than shields, which they will eventually become later. But this is the first time the Enterprise extends its shields over another ship. And this will be a recurring thing throughout the shows. It's a very important little concept. Basically, the little ship burns its engine out. It's starting to overheat.
If we might get to one little piece, and this might have to deal with, like, the way the Federation is treating this mission, because at this point in the story, it's still a little unclear of precisely what the parameters of the mission that Enterprise has. Because right now they're acting as interspace police. Are they a scout vessel? Are they an interstellar police force? What is the Enterprise?
So the primary purpose of the Enterprise is as a vehicle of exploration. It is to seek out new life, new civilization. It is to determine if there are alien species out there who can join the Federation, who can become part of it. Now, the Enterprise doesn't exclusively do that. And that's going to continue to TNG and, on a lesser extent, to Voyager. And they're going to hammer home on this a lot in Enterprise. But the Enterprise also has other responsibilities to the Federation. So you'll have a bunch of episodes going forward where they'll be like, Kirk, I know you're out here doing this, but you're the only ship in the area. You've got the training, you've got the manpower, you've got the firepower to deal with this political, social, military issue. So exploration is their primary purpose, but Starfleet will often tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, you're the most advanced ship in the fleet. We need you to do some of these other things.
Because this legitimately feels like a little bit of a distraction from their prime directive. Just a little more off the beaten trail. Wondering how wise it is to really be sidetracked to this degree, but hey, I'm not the captain.
There are only 12 Constitution-class Federation starships that exist at the time of the original series. Only 12 ships at all that are the same model and make as the Enterprise. So even though their original purpose is to go out and explore, there are often times where they're dragged off into other stuff. And that doesn't bother me, I think, as much as it bothers you, because I'm more familiar with the series as a whole. So I appreciate that as a military vessel. As, in a sense, the Enterprise is almost more comparable to some of our early pioneers, where it's like sometimes you're over here, you're mostly here to explore, but sometimes you got to set up a trade agreement. Sometimes you got to shoot somebody. It depends on what's going on, because ultimately the Enterprise answers to Starfleet Command.
I think that's a reasonable way to put it. It just seemed that, I guess, the scope of what the Federation isn't, as I said, isn't clear at this point. So looking at allocation of resources, officers, ships, and priorities, I guess I don't have the context for that just yet. That said, it's not really a big sticking point.
You'll get adjusted to it as time goes on, and you'll see that it's like, oh, they also do some other stuff. And to me, I think those are some of the best episodes, is when they're involved in some of the other stuff.
I hope so. World building is some of the best part.
But they're still figuring out what this series is even about. When Gene Roddenberry pitched Star Trek, it was a wagon train to the stars. So it's very like pseudo-Western, but they're still figuring out developing their mythos. And they're going to go some great places with it. This is not necessarily one of those places, but we'll continue to power forward. Because the Enterprise is ultimately, you wouldn't believe it because of all the phasers and torpedoes, but they're ultimately a ship that's out there to do peace stuff. They put their shields out over the little ship so it doesn't get utterly destroyed by asteroids.
And let me just tell you how much I love this part of it. I will say that this is a very strong part of lore building. Giving a ship an ability is always a dangerous thing, because that ability in the future needs to be remembered, and it also has to have consequences. Now in this, we understand that the stated limits involve that extending the shields in this way can overload and break the dilithium crystals. And that's great, because what happens when you give a ship strong abilities without detailing canon limits on it? You create problems, like The Last Jedi and the hyperspace ram. Like, That's what happens when you just give something
No,
the ability to do something.
We're talking about good sci-fi. We're talking about Mudd's Women. Mudd's Women might not be the best episode of Star Trek, but it's Shakespeare compared to The Last Jedi.
I know, but that's why I'm giving this credit, is that it details a consequence for what is objectively a very powerful ability, so that it can't just be used at whim.
Exactly. There's too much end power being needed to extend the shields, and they crack and break all but one of their dilithium crystals. I do think it's kind of funny because when the lights go out, it looks like they blew a fuse, which always makes me kind of chuckle when they burn through one of the dilithium crystals. But James Doohan works really hard here selling the tension as Scotty watches the engine burn out. So I think it's a solid cold open.
And showing the power fail instead of just saying it, I think sells it. I think that's another good part of this.
And then Scotty, who's concerned about the lithium crystals burning out, and again, they say lithium, not dilithium, but we're almost there. We'll be saying dilithium, I think, starting next episode for the rest of Star Trek as we know it, is concerned because the other ship is not going to hold. They have to drop the shield. The ship explodes, but Scotty has got the people in transport.
Yeah, where are they at this point? Between when they appear in the room and when the ship explodes, there's this moment of time where they are somewhere.
They are in the matter stream. So they are disassembled. Their atoms are disassembled. They're in the transporter beam. And this is a very dangerous place to be because if Scotty isn't a very good transporter chief, which thankfully he is, they would just disintegrate.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
There's a character in TNG named Lieutenant Barclay who's phobic about using the transporter. And every time something goes wrong in the transporter, my wife and I will go, "Barclay was right!" Which is funny, though, because in this scene, as Scotty is fighting with the transporter, McCoy's there standing by to treat injuries. And he goes, "I never trusted this thing." And that is a huge selling point for McCoy's character. Because McCoy does not like technology, and he does not trust technology. McCoy does his job and goes through the transporter because he's a responsible employee, but he does not like it. And that is a cute little character trait that helps set McCoy apart from the rest of the crew, because nobody else has any reservations about any of this technology.
McCoy's best crewman.
Only McCoy does.
Yep, best crewman.
They beam the captain over, and it's this suave, braggadocious gentleman with a curly mess. He's trying to be
suave.
I love Harry Mudd, and I don't care what you think.
He looks like a Texan. I hate his sleeves. What is that belt? And he talks like a Munchkin leprechaun.
He only fakes the Irish accent until they reveal that he's Harry Mudd. He's pretending to be Leo Walsh, the captain of this ship that blew up. He says his name is Leo Walsh, but we all know that this is Harry Mudd. He is admittedly doing a not very good Irish accent, but that's okay, because he's faking it, because he's trying to be another person.
I'm just going to throw out right now, then, that I don't think his other speaking voice later in the episode is any better.
Boo. Boo. Where was I? Yeah, so Scotty gets the rest of the crew of the ship over before it explodes, and the Enterprise is forced to go on battery power. I think saying battery power is kind of hilarious, because it makes me think there's a bunch of Ds plugged up somewhere in the back of the Enterprise. They will eventually continue to have battery power, but they call it something else, because battery power does sound silly. But they're on battery power, and Scotty beams over the rest of the crew.
And let me tell you, the scene in which this happens, again, I give them credit for setup. The scenario is well put. Spock is visibly confused. Mudd gives a very knowing side glance, and then the hailing whistle from the bridge goes off. As in, it's like... And I was like, oh, that's very clever.
And the crew are three very attractive women in very interesting kind of sci-fi outfits. One's wearing like a throw rug as like a clothes. That's my wife watched this episode with me, and she thought that was hilarious. There's the tall brunette has got like kind of like what you would consider like an evening dress, but there's like a bunch of weird slashes in it. Like There's one across her chest, and then the other woman has got a pink one which has similar cuts down the side. And this is the first episode. You're going to see this a lot in classic Star Trek. When there's a close-up on a woman, they hit them hard with the soft filter. That wasn't just Star Trek that did that. They did that a lot in the 60s, but Star Trek does this a lot. This is the first time you are going to see this soft filter whenever there's a close-up on the women to emphasize how beautiful they are, and you hear this kind of harp sting. It's the first time we see this.
It's when they say, ladies and gentlemen, this is the beach episode.
And we've got this great line. McCoy says, "Is that your crew?" And Mudd goes, "That's me cargo." And I love that line and how he delivers it. We go to the coal.
That's me lucky charm.
That's me cargo.
No.
Kirk has this great line after that where he says, I want them up there whether they can walk or not, because Kirk is mad. Because of Captain Walsh, i.e. Mr. Mudd, they've burned out their engines and they're in a pretty precarious position. Because as Scotty points out in their next scene on the bridge, while Scotty's explaining the situation to Kirk, the only dilithium crystal they have left is cracked, and it will not sustain all the ship's power through it for very long. So they have to get somewhere safe. Scotty's going to go back to the position, figure out where that is. Spock takes the women up and Mudd up to meet the captain. We have the only gratuitous butt shot in the episode as they walk through the hallways, and they play this sultry jazz music, which I love.
I wasn't sure if I saw Vest Guy on the way up or not.
There is a great shot where the guy is climbing, one of the background crewmen is climbing up the ladder, you know, the famous orange ladder that's in every hallway, and his head is already up, so he shouldn't be able to see, but as the women walk by, he ducks his head out like he just senses there's some booty on board the Enterprise. In the background, we have the first ever distracted boyfriend moment, where there is a male and a female crew member. This is in the background, it literally happens, walking by, and the man crew member cranks his head to look back at the women as they go by, and the female crew member who's with him looks at him, and it's literally distracted boyfriend 50 years ahead.
Remember all of this male attention when we get to the conundrum of the women and why they're selling themselves in the first place.
So,
remember all this male attention.
So they can barely walk through without every guy trying to take a look at them, except Spock, who's super diplomatic. They get into the elevator, and the ladies are trying to turn the charm on Spock, as the ladies try to do. And Mudd says, ladies don't matter. This one's part Vulcanian. So, again, we're getting close. Spock is a Vulcan, not a Vulcanian. But in these early episodes, we're figuring out exactly what this universe is. But this is the first time we've heard Spock's other half mentioned by name. Because up until this point, it's just been my father's people, or my father, or something to that effect. So they're almost there. They get up to the bridge, and
Yeah, Dr. Eggman can tell that Spock won't be so easily affected.
Harry is very insistent that the women do not submit to a medical exam. He's going to bring this up a couple of times.
Yeah.
Do not submit to a medical exam. Kirk says, you're in a lot of trouble, Captain Walsh, because we almost blew up the Enterprise getting you over here, and there's going to be a hearing. This is going to be the first of many hearings on board the Enterprise to deal with legalese. But basically, we got a problem. You have got
But let me tell you, when they get up to the bridge, we should note the crew's reaction. Because the crew in the bridge also is starting to fall. Scotty goes down. McCoy falls prey. By the way, to quote the meme, friendship ended with McCoy. Now Spock is my best friend. Because Spock can handle it. Kirk also gets a little bit...
But this is a great episode for Kirk. Because everybody thinks of Kirk as like this woman chaser. Kirk is the only one throughout this episode who is actively resisting the women.
That's true, but he's no Spock.
He's no Spock, but Spock literally doesn't have the same emotional degree that we do. Spock has got a bonus. Kirk is like a red-blooded American man, but he is so devoted to his duty that he fights his natural urges to be with these beautiful women, and he does it throughout the episode. When they beam on, Scotty goes, "Aye," and McCoy says, "Amen to that, Scotty," which is the best episode.
I hate that line. I hate this.
You hate that line? I love that line. McCoy, amen to that, Scotty.
Oh.
McCoy always likes the ladies.
I trusted you, McCoy.
McCoy loves them ladies. He's just a good southern country doctor. So, Scotty drops one of only 2 profanities in all of the original series run when he says that Mudd's a jackass, which really made me chuckle because they don't really swear on the original series at all. Maybe jackass wasn't considered to be really profanity back then.
It's descriptive.
It makes me laugh because Mudd certainly is a jackass, which is what Kirk says. And they decide, we're going to run through to Rigel 12. It's relatively close by. We can get there on impulse power. There is a lithium mining station on board. We can get replacement crystals there. We won't burn ourselves
Here's
out.
a clarifying question before we pass it. When Mudd's on the bridge, and he's trying to bluff his way out of things, he says, how am I supposed to know this is a starship? Maybe because it's flying in space? Or is starship a very specific classification only given to a subset of vessels that is a technical clarifier?
Now, starship is, I don't know how they're viewing it at this time, but it's going to be a catch-all term. I think, does he say starship, or does he say, how am I
He
supposed to know
literally
this is a
says,
starship?
how am I supposed to know this is a starship? And I'm like, maybe because you're not dying in space, and you're moving in space.
I feel like that's a bit of a flub, because I think what he meant in the script was something to the effect of, if this was a TNG episode, for instance, when the lore is more established, he would have said, how was I supposed to know this was a Starfleet vessel? How was I supposed to know that you really are with the United Federation of Planets and not Marauders or something like that? So I don't have a problem with this line, because to me, I brush it off as we're figuring things out. If this was a later episode, he would say, how do I know this is a Starfleet vessel? Now, that does raise a good point of, well, it's pretty obvious because it's got a Starfleet registration number on it, and you would have been hailed with Starfleet identification. And at the time of the original series, there aren't a lot of spaceships out here in space. But, I mean, Mudd's a rogue, so he's trying to come up with any excuse he can to cover his butt. It's a weak one, but we've all pulled into work late and said, oh, my dog ate my homework. Yeah. So it's not Mudd's best game. He's still got 3 aces up his sleeve.
He's still Leo Walsh. The game's not up yet. Mr. Crazy Eyes, Mr. Mustache, going strong.
They don't realize that he's Harry Mudd, intergalactic con artist. He's just Leo Walsh, and he's got 3 lovely ladies that he's taken with him to meet some guys, and they're going to explain all of this at the trial.
They will, but before that, just like with the crew falling apart, Mr. Farrell starts to fall apart, which technically, if you think about it in some ways, is our 3rd navigator down, which makes this like the Defense Against the Dark Arts position. So, are we always going to have this level of rotation of the navigator? I think you mentioned until we actually get Chekhov?
Chekhov will join us episode 1 of season 2.
Okay.
So there will be... The main navigator for season 1 is going to be a gentleman named Kevin Riley, whose character I actually rather like, and who they just phased out at some point. He will have the most times in this chair, aside from Chekhov. And he even has 1 or 2 episodes where he's even like a focal character. So we are almost done with rotating navigators, because Mr. Farrow is going to be with us for about 3 episodes, and then Mr. Riley's going to take over for like 10 or 11 episodes. Then we'll have a handful of replacement navigators again, and then boom, Chekhov for the rest of it. Kirk has this great line where he says, "You're a liar, Mr. Walsh." When he says, "I'm a whatever, Captain," Kirk says, "You're a liar, Mr. Walsh." So I think we understand each other. Kirk continuing to be awesome. I have been going through the other Star Trek, so it's been a little bit since I've gone back to Kirk. And I just really appreciate going back to Kirk and being reminded of how great Kirk is. And I think this episode has got a lot of problems, but it's a great episode for Kirk, and for kind of establishing what kind of character Kirk is. Not to the same degree Corbomite Maneuver is. I think Corbomite is a very strong Kirk episode, but this one has got strong Kirk elements.
I gotta say, I'm gonna have to contest that at one point when we get to the trial. I'm gonna have to say I do not think Kirk's judgment is being very strongly displayed at one point, but we'll get there in a sec.
So, they confine Mudd and the women to the quarters until the trial. We get to a trial sequence. This is the first of many trials. Before the trial again, Mudd tells the women, don't lie. Just be fine. Don't worry about it. Just don't let them scan you with a medical scanner. We have a trial sequence. This is the first of many times we will hear the computer voice. The computer voice, of course, is provided by Michelle Barrett, Gene Roddenberry's mistress, and she will be providing the voice of the computer for like every Star Trek show. So she's probably done more Star Trek than any other single actor. She's the voice of the computer in TOS, in TNG, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and I think Enterprise, although I haven't heard the computer speak yet in Enterprise, so I can't say that definitively speaking. But she makes her first appearance as a computer voice, and it's great. It's one of those, first times you really got to mark that down. Because they say, what's your name? It says Leo Walsh. Computer goes, incorrect. What's your real name? Harry Mudd. Harcourt Fenton Mudd. Blast that tin-plated pot, is what he says about the computer. When he says, oh, this is my life's work. I'm a good, honest man. Well, and it turns out Mudd's not a good, honest man. They flash up his little driver's license, and it's got all of the crimes he's committed. Starship theft. He's a rogue. It's a litany of all the crimes you could commit without your character being a real psychopath. It's theft. It's connery. It's not victimless crime, but it's not violent crime. It's a lot of that. He says, I've devoted my whole life to this business of finding wives for lonely settlers on faraway planets. Incorrect. Well, I'm about to start devoting my whole life to it. the concept of someone providing basically mail order wives for settlers. People might think I'm kind of sexist for this, but I think that's a neat concept. It has its roots back in a Western exploratory time period, and Star Trek was heavily influenced, the original series, by the Western genre. It's an idea that makes sense, especially if you've only got 12, 13 people on a colony ship. And at this time, they don't have long-range communication. You can't carry a mail-letter relationship over long distances. I like the concept. I like the idea that we're going back to an older way of doing things, where it's you put out a wanted ad and you have other people come in. The only problem is, as Ethan has so elegantly pointed out, is that these women say they're from situations where there are no husbands for them to get. That's okay. I'll buy that. One's from an agricultural planet, and there's probably like 20 people on it, and they're all family, and one's from a space station. And I buy the fact that there's no men where they're from, because we haven't seen where they're from, and so I'm willing to accept it. Ethan points out, though, that later in this episode, they're going to try and go after the Rigelian miners, and there's a crew full of like hot-blooded young starship men who are craning their necks to get a peek at these ladies as they walk by.
And let me clarify, like, by the further parts of this episode, these women are desperate to get to this mining colony. And it's like, okay, if you were like thinking this was a nobility thing and being like, these were the people that we signed on to go be mail order brides for, and da-da-da, and whatever you set that contract up, and it's like, I need to see it through. But they're like, we need to find a man. And it's like, really? Because I don't know where you are, but you're surrounded by availability and interest.
Yes, but the men of Starfleet, I don't think they get paid.
They do get paid in phaser bolts.
They get paid in being on the world's best job. Because let me tell you, friends, if right now the UNS, the Starfleet said, hey, Alec, you will just get room and board, but you want to join a starship, I would be hands down in that. They go into a lot in this in the lore, the money rules for... this is mostly a joke. I don't want to get too sidetracked on the economics of the Federation, but it's a little wishy-washy here and there. We might talk about that at some point when it becomes more directly relevant. The point is, Kirk just uncovers the truth, that Leo Walsh is actually Harry Mudd. He's a con artist, but he says he is really taking these women to meet their husbands on this other planet. Well, they can't take them there now, but hey... Don't worry, ladies. There's no crimes being laid against you. All the crimes are being laid against Mudd. Mudd, we're locking you in your quarters until we can distribute you with the proper authority to do this.
But let me tell you, the ladies exert a pretty powerful influence on the crew as they're doing this trial. And that brings me to Kirk's failure of judgment. Because Kirk already knew that these women were influencing the crew in this way. And yet, until they need to be called as witnesses, why are they even in the room? They're only there so Mudd can have them influence the committee. And yet
Mudd's playing smart.
Can they call them as witnesses? Of course they can call in witnesses, but actually have them have to like come in the room one at a time to be a witness. I think that Kirk has in some ways not protected his crew well from this form.
That's a fair point. Because in case you haven't seen the episode in a while, by this point it is clear that there is something about the women. Yes, they are beautiful, but there's almost like a hypnotic... They're more than just attractive women. There is some kind of influence that they have, like an actual presence. But yeah, that does happen. Kirk says, "You're confined to quarters, Mr. Mudd." Then he leaves. And then Mudd, in front of two security guards... who are in this scene.
No red shirts have died yet. It's okay.
But they don't say anything to Captain. Mudd puts his feet on the desk and proudly exclaims that he will take over the ship and Kirk will be taking orders from Harcourt Fenton Mudd. He laughs proudly about it while two security guards are standing there, and those guys should have gotten fired because Kirk does not find out that Mudd has loudly boasted that he plans to steal the ship from Kirk, which I don't know about you, but when I worked security for over a year, okay? And if in front of me, when I was at my post, if some guy had put his feet on the desk and said, "I'm going to steal your boss's base of operation," I would have at least written that down in my duty log. As a funny aside, One of the security guards in the scene is unofficially known as Vinci, because that was the name of the actor who played him. And he's in like 90 episodes in the background.
So he's one of the ones that didn't get shot.
Yeah, and he will never get shot.
Oh,
sometimes
great.
he's a transporter captain. Sometimes he's just a guy. And this is the first time Vinci appears. So, a little bit of background.
Another thing to look forward to.
Mudd is trapped in his quarters. I'm assuming they haven't figured out that the Enterprise has a brig yet. Because in later episodes, they would have thrown Mudd in the brig. But I'm guessing that at the time of writing this episode, they hadn't decided that the Enterprise had a brig. So, whatever. Maybe because they haven't actually proved that Mudd is done.
Yeah, they haven't convicted him of anything.
They can't throw him in the brig. Whatever. So Mudd sends the women out to go find information for him. And so Ruth, the dark-haired woman, makes her way into sickbay. McCoy kicks the nurse out, which is hilarious. Because McCoy wants to sweet talk Ruth, and she's sweet-talking him. Oh, tell me about the miners on Rigel. Are they healthy? And McCoy goes, yes, they're very healthy. But Ruth, like a dummy, stands in front of one of McCoy's medical scanners, and it starts to go off. Beep, beep, beep. And McCoy goes, that's odd. It's never done that before. Please go stand in front of the scanner again. And even though Mudd has given the women literally one instruction, don't let them give a medical scan. She stands in front of it, all seductively. We get a lot of soft camera.
He even says, would you go back in front of that?
She leans her hands behind it, very, very pin-up. But I can't get over the fact that she was dumb enough to do that. McCoy says, oh, there's nothing wrong. It's great. It's nice. And then she leaves, but he continues to think about it. Kirk goes into his room, and Eve, one of the ladies, is there. And she says, I was so tired of all the men staring at me, I had to come in and find a place to hide. And Kirk is doing his darndest, again, not like the Kirk that people think exists, but the actual character of Kirk. This woman is in an enclosed space. She's lying on his bed, and she's coming onto him hard, and he resists her.
I'm actually going to contradict that. I'm going to say the only reason she didn't succeed is that she couldn't go through with it, not that Kirk succeeded.
When she was leaning in to kiss him, he leaned his head back, and he started putting his hand between them, because Kirk trusts no thought.
I'm afraid that we'll have to professionally disagree here. I say that this is a mark against the captain, but,
Ethan says that Kirk was blocked by Eve having second thoughts. I say Kirk was resisting. You'll have to watch the episode, leave a comment underneath, and tell us which of us is wrong. What's important about this episode is she has this great line where she says to Kirk, I hear starship captains are supposed to be paragons of virtue. I've never met a paragon. And Kirk says, neither have I. I think that's a great self-deprecating line. I really, really like it. I think that line belongs in a better episode because I think it's a very good line. Kirk says, neither have I. But Eve has second thoughts. She tells Kirk that Mudd is the one who's put her up to this because she actually is starting to really like Kirk. And so she runs off, and Kirk stands there like, what the heck was that all about? We cut back to where Harry and the women are. You have Eve, the dark-haired woman, tells Mudd, hey, there are three... You're right, Eve is the blonde. Ruth, the dark-haired woman, tells Mudd that there are 3 miners on Rigel. They're all healthy. Magda, the woman who is clearly a model from Eastern Europe and who does not have a lot of dialogue compared to the other 2 women, because when she speaks, it's with a very thick Slavic accent, says she was able to get a communicator from one of the guys in the communications department.
And it seems to be that Mudd's plan gets a little clearer at this point. At first, when he boasted he was going to be captain, he didn't know what he was angling for. Here he actually says he's angling for the lithium crystals himself. So we see that they're sort of starting to come into play, like, what is it he's going to try and do?
There are 3 miners and 3 lovely ladies, says Harry Mudd. So Harry says, ladies, forget about those stupid farmers you were going to marry on this other planet. Why don't you marry lithium miners? They're rich, they're lonely, you're going to have so much cash, you aren't even going to know what to do with it. You are going to be loaded, girls.
What are they going to buy?
Ruth, I will make you a countess. Magda, you'll be a duchess.
The Countess of a rock in the middle of nowhere.
We'll get to that, because we don't know what the planet looks like yet. So right now, this seems like an appealing deal. We don't know anything about the planet other than that there's a lithium mining station on it. That's all we know at this point.
Okay.
Ruth, I keep getting the ladies mixed up. Eve comes in, and she's not wanting to go for it. She's interested in Kirk. Mudd speaks prophetically when he says the captain will always choose his starship, which we're going to see a bunch of times in the future. So you could say a lot of things about Mudd. He's certainly a liar, but he's not wrong there. And then this is where we start to reveal the twist. And in my opinion, The episode's been pretty good up to this point. This is, in my opinion, where the episode starts to go downhill because they reveal the mystery too soon, and also for a bunch of other stuff we'll get to when we get to. But to me, this is the turning point. At this point, I'm going, this episode is better than I remember. I thought this was not going to be a great episode, but it's been good so far. It turns out the women are ugly.
And you mean average, if not slightly better than average?
They put a lot of makeup on Ruth, the dark-haired woman, to give her like warts and stuff, but then they just messed up the hair on the other two and made their eyes look baggy. I don't know. I don't think even Ruth, the one who they made all the effort in to try and make her look ugly, is that unattractive. But the ladies they're not as attractive as they appear to be, and they're not like psychically attractive. Like
I guess you can say that part's fair. You're right. They are no longer psychically attractive.
They're taking some sort of drug. So Mud gives them the drug so they can stay beautiful and alluring. But Eve, she doesn't like it. At this, like, she's starting to have second thoughts. She's going, I don't like this cheat. You know, we're better than this. And he goes, oh, it's not a cheat, not really. You know, take the drug, be attractive. You don't.
As if D&D hasn't taught anyone anything. Psionics are broken.
Then we get back to the bridge. So we've got Harry in the room. And we have probably the last good scene of the episode, where Sulu and Pharaoh are talking about how the ladies are pretty, and Kirk cracks the whip. He's like, guys, pay attention. Do your freaking jobs. We got to get to Rigel or we'll all die. And then McCoy is talking to Kirk in the scene, and he says, are they really that beautiful? Like, are they pound for pound, measurement for measurement, the most beautiful women you've ever seen? Or is it just something up with them? Is that we're tired, or is this because my scanner was all weird?
Yeah, Bones has broken free of confusion. He is once again very wise, and he's my friend again. He can tell there's an illusory effect. Bones is back on the friend list.
But it's worth pointing out that Scotty broke away a long time ago because he's been so concerned about the ship the whole time. Because Scotty is the man! Jazzy's favorite character is Scotty, and she was very proud to point out how quickly Scotty shrugged off the effects of the women. I forgot to point out that Mud hides the drug under his mattress like a kid, which I think is just hilarious, because he forgets where he puts it, so he tears the apartment apart looking for it and hits it under his mattress like a kid does with like his first Playboy magazine, and that just makes me laugh.
And that endears Mud to you? Oh, again, do not like Mud.
I like Mud. The room, by the way, that they're in is Kirk's room, but they just took all the props out of it.
I thought you were going to compare the character of Mud to the most famous classic of all time, The Room.
I love that movie too, but for totally different reasons. Harry Mudd is too good for The Room. Now, the episode really starts to struggle. Well, not immediately, because now we get in contact with the miners. Kirk says, hey man, we want to buy some, dilithium crystals. We got a lot of money, we're back for the Federation. And they're like, yeah, we can make a trade. We want Mud's women. Because Mud has contacted the miners behind Kirk's back so that he can make a deal. He's going to get the crystals, and he's also going to get a pardon.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to once again throw in a little bit of a plot hole here and just say that this is another one of those ones. Kirk and his men were really keen to enforce the law on Mud, but now that these miners are suggesting the trading of humans for goods, which is objectively illegal and almost sounds somewhat like slave trading, too bad there isn't a starship nearby with a security team authorized to enforce the law. I don't know, but someone just seemed to announce and propose an exchange of illicit human product.
But by that definition, you can't also have mail-order brides, which I suppose is what they were doing at the beginning. Although we don't know what the deals were for that. We don't know that there was any. We just know that Mud was taking these women to marry these guys.
Yes.
And we assumed he was getting some cut for
here is an
service.
Explicit statement. The only thing we will trade you for these lithium crystals
is Mud's women.
Is humans. And that is definitively slave trading. They could at that point take anything they want, at least under any reasonable
and Kirk says no deal, because of course he does. And then Mud goes, hey Kirk, your ship's going to crash into the atmosphere and you'll all die in about 50 minutes not 50 minutes, in about, 12 hours?
Yeah.
You crash in about 12 hours without the crystals. So yeah, you can stand on your high horse for now, but you'll have to deal. And rather than having a good scene where we see Kirk agonize over this decision, rather than have a good scene where Kirk goes to his quarters and really wrestles with this, this is a wrong thing to do, but is it more wrong to let the Enterprise blow up? We don't have that. It comes back from the break, and Kirk has just decided to do the deal. We are robbed of that scene where Kirk wrestles with the morality, choosing the lesser of two evils. We're robbed of that scene, and instead, we meet the miners, and they're all, to quote Scotty, jackasses. They're unlikable, greasy, grody-looking men. They live on this crappy little planet. Rigel, now we go to Rigel, and it's a crappy planet. I like the set design, if the set design was to show that the planet is crappy, which I assume is what they're going for. They live in these cruddy little houses that look worse than the house that Luke Skywalker lives in at the beginning of Star Wars Episode 4.
Well, everything about this just seems like the worst trade deal.
There are just 3 of them, and we assume they're the only people on the entire planet, because they're just
no one else can stand them.
They are there mining the dilithium crystals, and sure, they're apparently wealthy, but they live in these crappy little houses, and they have nothing to spend the money on.
But all the money in the world.
Ruth and Magda are like, cool beans, we'll play along with these guys so we can get loaded. Again, only Eve, who's the one who of the 3 women, is the one who is an actual character, who's not just there as part of the story. She doesn't want to go along with it because the lead miner, Childress, he's the one who kind of likes her, and Childress is the worst of the 3 miners. This dude is a huge twat.
She gets a cough, and he's like, I guess you're a failure.
Because it's dusty on here. And he abandons her to go hang out with Ruth, who's more than happy to hang out with her. For no reason other than tension, Kirk's like, okay, we've done the deal. You have the women to be your wives. Give us the crystals. And Childress goes, maybe later, I don't feel like it right now. Like, for no reason whatsoever, he decides to dick around with the man who's sitting in orbit with torpedoes and phasers and nothing to lose.
You know what this sounds like? This sounds like fraud, which, by the way, is another legal offense, which maybe a security team could be brought in to deal with.
They literally only do this for added drama, and it makes no sense, because I think they got to the point where they're like, oh crap, there's still like 15 minutes of screen time left, and the story is like done. Because up until this point, Kirk is trying to keep the peace, but if I was suddenly denied my only method of saving my entire crew, I might get violent. The women flirt with the guys because they want the money, except Eve. Eve's not happy. The miners start to physically fight over the other 2 women, because no one wants Eve, because Eve's being a wet blanket, because she doesn't want to be with these scummy miners.
And because she coughs.
Because she's got an allergy to all the dust on Rigel, which is a dusty, dusty planet. She says, why don't you just, bet over me, and the loser gets me, and runs off into the desert. Kirk runs after her because, he's not a monster. And everyone else just kind of stands there, because Spock is there, and he doesn't follow. He lets Kirk run off into the wilderness. Childress eventually follows and chases her out into the wilderness. This sounds like it's a big part of the episode, but it's only like 3 minutes. Yep. I'm not kidding. If you watch the preview, they made it think like the woman going missing on the planet was a huge part of the plot, but it's not. It's resolved in like literally 3 minutes. Kirk runs out, can't find her, they beam him back to the ship, they scan the planet with infrared, which is smart.
I'll tell you what's dumb, though, in this scene. Mudd's allowed on the bridge. Mudd has just conned you. He's guilty of interstellar crimes, and you've let this man sit on your bridge. While your captain was on the planet, by the way.
And Spock, the first officer.
Another grievous oversight in the way that the Enterprise has been run this episode. Am I saying this is a statement on the caliber of the crew or the ship as a whole? No, this episode has just treated a lot of people very poorly.
I could see on your notes you wrote bridge in like all capital letters because you... See, I didn't even notice that. I didn't even think about that because I was too busy going, wow, they're wrapping this thread up really, really fast. Because they scan the planet with infrared and they don't find her. But Childress, the miner, even though he said you can get lost 15 feet from your house in the sandstorm, finds her and takes her back. I was talking to Jazzy about that, and I was like, I think that's kind of dumb. And she's like, yeah, but he knows the planet better than anybody. And I was like, fine, I'll let it slide. But then they have this awful, awful scene between Eve and Childress, and it's a terrible scene. The only good thing in that scene is it's the first time we see the circular playing cards, which are another kind of like the 3-tiered, kind of like the 3D chess that's very popular in Star Trek. The circle playing cards are another thing that's great. So I was like, hey, look! Circular playing cards! I love that! And I focused on that for the rest of the scene because that was the only good thing in the scene. They talk back and forth. She makes him dinner because she's like trying to be a decent person. And he's like a jerk about it for no reason. I'm like, you got a free meal, what the heck? He's like, I'm supposed to be impressed because a woman cooked for me? I've been cooking for myself for years. And she's like, hey man, your pots are friggin' dirty. This is literally in the episode. I'm not making this up. She's like, your pots are filthy. And he's like, there's 3 layers of dust on it, and I can't fill a sink with water because all the water's hard to get. She's like, well, put them out to get dust blasted, you idiot. And he does, and there's this, and that's the only shot, by the way, that I really remember from the episode before I watched it again, is him hanging his pots out. It's like, that's a scene that goes on, and he's like, I don't really like you. Again, Eve has been nothing but decent.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
I'll give her that.
She's been nothing but decent to this total jerk. And he's like, oh, I don't like you. Kirk and Mudd come down together. I don't remember why they come down together. It's been a little bit since I watched this episode. Maybe I should have watched it again. They determine that their beauty is fake. It's all part of the drug. Mudd explains that the women are taking the Venus drug, which enhances a person more on what they already have. He says for men, it makes them more aggressive, more muscular. For women, he says it makes them rounder, more pleasant, which is a great description. And then she doesn't want to take it, and Childress looks, he's like, you're homely. I don't want you because you're unattractive.
He says they really look like she does, and you're like,
she's also the one that's the best looking of the 3 without the makeup. Like, they didn't give her any makeup or anything. She just looks kind of tired. She's not a bad looking woman without the stuff, but he acts like she's someone who's really, really ugly, which is a real disservice to this like attractive young lady. She's like, do you want? And she has this bizarre line where she says, do you want a wife who's pretty and vain and useless, as if attractive people can't do household chores? She's like, or do you want a woman who's going to cook and sew and cry for you, who's going to be loyal? Do you want one who's vain and useless? She's like, fine, I'll become a vain, useless wife if that's what you want. Even though he's already implied that he could do his own cooking and probably his own sewing and all those domestic things because he has to, because there's nobody else there. Also, again, implying that beautiful people can't cook and sew, which doesn't make sense to me because I've seen Gordon Ramsay, so don't tell me beautiful people can't cook.
Which is when we get a pretty good twist. And I'll have to amend something I said before. I don't think Mudd was allowed on the bridge without the others present, because I'm pretty sure he was on the planet whenever Kirk was. Still, though, I don't think he should have been allowed on the bridge at all, just to clarify that. But here, Mudd is with Kirk, and they bring out the drug, or what is supposed to be thought of as the drug.
So she takes it to be like, oh, you're fine, I'll be that way. And then she's all beautiful again. And she's like, and he says, yeah, I don't want this beauty. This beauty's fake. You get so mad, which, again, I don't fully understand, because isn't all beauty kind of fake in some sense? But whatever. And Kirk goes, it was just a fake. You know, it was just gelatin. There was no real drug. Mudd's like, yeah, Kirk took all of my stack. She's like, the beauty was inside you. It was your own confidence.
The real drug was the friends we made along the way.
It's a nice kind of upbeat, happy little thing where it's like, oh, you know, you needed to stand up for yourself. It's immediately undercut by the fact that she's going to stay with this guy, but whatever.
Yeah.
Also, the other 2 women got married to the miners over subspace radio off camera, which is a hilarious line. Where it's like they're in Vegas. So yeah, they got married over subspace radio, which
explains why you don't see them for the rest of the episode.
No. Because the other 2 miners are like, we don't care if it's fake beauty, whatever, we're on board, high five. Hey, you made me breakfast this morning? That's great. Because the other 2 miners are apparently people, and Childress is some kind of moron. How did he get to be the boss when he's the one who's like, free meal? Oh, you're not attractive. Because there's nobody else on the planet. There 3 women literally come down, and they're going to marry you, and this guy is like, he's like nitpicking.
I'm just going to say that all of them are terrible, and that Childress is more terrible. I don't think there's any heroes on this planet.
The 60s is very strong at the last part of this episode. That's all I'm going to say here. I'm not the kind of person who's very quick to be like sexism and racism, and I don't care about that in my entertainment if it's good, but at a certain point it gets so overt that even I notice.
Yeah, you said a very important point, is that you don't look for it and you don't mind if it's like, you don't microanalyze for it.
Especially in the era.
If it's good. And the problem is, this wasn't good.
They tie it on with the end with a nice little message of, hey, it was inside you all along, and it's like, well, then maybe you should go, I don't know, and ask Lieutenant Farrow out on a date, because he seems like a pretty...
Farrow survived! He has value!
He's the first helmsman to make it all the way through without getting killed or abandoning everyone to spend his time with a bald baby on a spaceship. Mudd tries to once again get Kirk to let him go. Kirk's like, no, Mr. Mudd, we are going to take you to trial. But I'll be happy to be a character witness for you at your trial. Mudd says, hey, throw away the key. This makes me really chuckle. We get to the very end of the episode. We get the last scene. Spock summarizes all our thoughts when he says, I think this was a very annoying episode. That's literally his line. McCoy says, Spock. Spock and McCoy have their first real banter, of which they're going to become famous for having that banter back and forth that they like to do. But McCoy's like, oh, that's right, Spock. Why don't you stab me in the heart? He said, except for you, it'd be here. And he dabs himself down in the kidneys because it's the first time we really sell the idea that Spock's internal physiology is very different. That's another important plot building. This is actually there's a later episode called Private Little War where Spock gets shot in the back, and they bring up again that his heart is where a human's kidney is because he gets shot in the heart, quote unquote, where a human would be, but he survives because of the different placement of his organs. So there's a little bit of world building there. There will be a payoff to this in like 30 episodes. So that's nice.
Which is interesting because in most series, the physiology usually resembles most strongly that of the maternal creature as opposed to the father, which brings up some biological questions. But
meh, the Vulcan genes are strong. Because for all intents and purposes, Spock looks fully Vulcan. When you see other Vulcans, even in later shows where the makeup got a little bit better and the budget got a little bit better, they look like Spock. So Spock really takes after Sarek, his father. And Spock tells McCoy that the fact that their internal organs are different pleases him to no end. Spock getting that final little dig in there. And then the episode ends. For a little bit of behind-the-scenes stuff, there are two important things to talk about for behind the scenes. First is that this is the first appearance of the soundstage cyclorama, which they use for the different planets with the different colored lights and gives many unique colored atmospheres, which is something classic Star Trek does very well. The atmospheres on the alien planets look alien. This one has a nice orange sky. We're going to get green and yellow and these bizarre colors that works really well. It's the first time we do that, and I really appreciate that. So we get that there. The other is that Harlan Ellison, who's going to be famous for writing The City on the Edge of Forever, which is argued by some people to be the best episode of Star Trek ever made for any series. It was voted by Star Trek fans at the convention in, I think, 2016 as the best Star Trek episode ever, period, of any show, is visiting the set during the filming of this episode. So Ellison is going to go on to write The City on the Edge of Forever. He is on the set and he has a little visit, so that's his first brush with Star Trek fame. He probably saw this episode and thought, well, I can write a better episode than that.
I hope the costume design isn't an inspiration for him later on.
No, The City on the Edge of Forever is I think it's a little overrated. Personally, it's not my favorite episode, but it's a very, very good episode. But we will get to that in about, I think, like 15.
Thanks for setting yourself up for the firing squad there. I already knew I was going to take some heat for my opinions on this episode, so you putting yourself in the line of fire there helps a lot.
By saying that I think The City on the Edge of Forever is a little overrated. Yeah, but that's about it for Mud's Women. For me, I'm not quite sure what to rate this, because for me, Mud's Women is almost two different episodes. The first half, it's a pretty good episode. Not a great episode, but a pretty good episode. And the second half is like the worst thing I've ever seen. Wait, that is not true. There are plenty of episodes coming up that are way worse than that. I will amend my statement to saying the second half is a very bad episode. And that one scene between Childress and Ruth is so bad. And everything with the miners is so bad. And the fact that we, instead of extending the search for her or spending more time with Mud, we have a literal 7-minute scene where these two people, who neither of which are that likable as a character, talk. And the best part is that there are cards that are circular and a guy hangs his pots out in the dust. That's not very good. So I'm kind of stuck on my rating. For those of you who are tuning in for the very first time on the podcast, we rate episodes on an A to F scale with pluses and minuses included. So, Ethan, on that scale, what would you give Mud's Women? Because maybe you'll sway me one way or the other. I've got two possible ratings.
Well, you have given me a bit of a change in perspective on some of the things. I like some of the technical aspects of the episode more than I thought I did. I like some of the character moments among the crew, separate from Mud and the Women, pretty strongly. And I think they did some neat things. As I said, I gave a lot of credit to the world-building part of the first 10 minutes or so. They did a decent job, at least from someone early in the series, giving me information that I can use later, even if a lot of the questions were unanswered. So, I know I'm going to know more, but I give it credit where credit's due. That said, I think that the episode failed to properly show the Enterprise's purpose being fulfilled in the universe. I think it generally failed in the purpose of sci-fi broadly to seek an encounter with the unknown. I think it failed to show Kirk as a responsible captain in many of the ways, especially after having him shown much stronger in other episodes. And I think it shows that overall the crew is not functioning very well as law enforcers of the Federation. So there were no space hobo children, so that's a plus. And Alec has indeed argued me up from what I was going to say, but that still means it remains at about a D.
A D. Okay. This is just me knowing some of the episodes down the line, and I know that at some point you're going to go, Mud's Women is not a D.
There's going to be some big Fs, man. I am not afraid to give out Fs.
Oh, I'm not either. There's at the top of my head right now, I can think of about 5 or 6 Fs. I'm just saying at some point you're going to look back and be like, Mud's Women is not a D. But I'll tell you what it will is, like a C+. Mud's Women is not a great episode. To me, Mud himself carries a lot of it. I love the Mud character. I think it's great that he comes back, but Mud's Women is no I Mud. I Mud is like an A, in my opinion. There is some good stuff at the beginning. I genuinely enjoy the mystery element, but they reveal the twist too soon in the episode that the women really do have like a psychokinetic ability with this drug. The miners are terrible. I don't like any of them. I really don't believe that Ruth, like this kind of... I'm not going to say she's smart, because I don't get the impression many of Mud's women any of them are particularly bright, but her deciding to stay with this guy doesn't match the motivation that she's established as, like, looking for a husband and not this jerk who is there.
I tell you, there's a whole set of Starfleet officers right now.
I don't like the resolution of the episode at all. I think the second half is poor to very bad. But I think the first half is good. I think Mud himself is good, even in the midst of that terrible stuff. So for me, I'm going to give this episode a C+. And I mean, I'm going to say that your rating of D is fair if you're going at this from one at a time. But that's why it's nice to have people who are different franchises along the franchise. Because for me, I'm thinking of episodes, I'm like, oh Lord, this episode is so much better than fill in the blank. Like Alternative Factor. Alternative Factor is an F. So thank you for sticking with Ethan and I this week as we discuss Mud's Women. We do not have mail order brides, so we don't have to worry about anyone coming in with Venus crystals and trying to sell us wives. If we did, we wouldn't even have crystals to trade back for those wives. So we're going to have to stick with what we've got.
My beauty and vanity, that's what
I did not win my wife by starship crystals. I won her with my charm and personality. So join us next week. Ethan, myself, and Bailey will be back. And next week we will watch The Enemy Within, which I don't remember as well as Mud's Women, but looking back and thinking about it is probably a better episode than Mud's Women. It's the first time we have a transporter accident.
I mean, unless Bailey's dead, in which case that'd be really sad.
Well, if Bailey's dead, we're going to have to find a new replacement. Maybe if the actor who played Gary Mitchell is still alive and out there, and we can... I'm sure he's not doing anything now. He's probably like 80. Let's get him on this podcast. Agreed. If you're out there, guy who played Gary Mitchell, and you're one of the 4 people who listen to this podcast... We want to hire you. I'll even give you, I don't know, $10 and a ham sandwich if you come down and do episodes with us. We love you, Gary. Anyway, from all of us here at the Bully Going Podcast, you know the drill. Likes, comments, blah, blah, blah. I'm not a beggar. But we genuinely appreciate those of you who are out there who are listening to us. We appreciate those of you who are giving us your support. And we hope that you will all have a good week. Take care.
Many thanks.